Welcome back, everyone. So the next step where we have finished is authenticating our API call using Postman, and we generate the JWT token and send it across with our API request to authenticate. Let me quickly go back into the Postman just to give you a refresher. So if you remember, we have a Lambda function that we have created as part of this exercise, and then on top of that we put the API gateway so it can be accessible through the API gateway, and then we set up the Cognito authentication using client credential, and then we pass the client credential to get the JWT token, and you can see I'm able to access this token by putting the post request, and this token is active for next 1 hour. And then what we did, we passed the token to our API, and if I quickly show you, let me hide this controls. If I come in here, so you can see that's my API that I'm trying to access, and right now it's sending me the unauthorized message because this API is now secured with JWT token. So in order to call the API, I need to pass the token, and then in the last video we have seen how we can pass the token alongside with our API URL. So if I just hit it, and you're gonna see I'm getting the results. The factorial function which I've developed as part of the Lambda function is returning me the result after passing the valid JWT token. Now that's the Postman environment where we test the API, the token part, and how it is interacting. Now it's time for us to actually move into the code environment and do exactly the same thing. We're gonna call the Cognito to get the token, and then once we get the token in the coding environment, we're gonna pass it to the API and get the result from the API, because obviously we are not going to develop this function as in an isolated environment. Generally, we build the APIs as part of some solution which has a bigger goal. So this module which I'm building now is going to be integrated as part of the main solution. It can be, I would say, any other solution which is providing the functionality, a piece of software, data analytics solution, or even ETL, where we have to secure our API calls just to make sure that only the authenticated user are able to access our APIs. So quickly going back into the dev environment, so you can see I'm in VS Code, and generally I prefer to develop in the local environment using VS Code. It has its own advantages, and you can see I'm using the VirtualBox, and I'm on the Ubuntu platform. If you want to learn how you can set up this environment, I already have the videos available in my channel that you can visit to set up everything from the scratch. The setup is pretty simple, so it's not going to take you much effort to build it. Okay, now in the VS Code environment, I'm using Python for this exercise, and one of the main item that I need is the request library. And in the request library, I need to, because I'm going to use the basic authentication to pass the authentication information, which is my client ID and client secret. You can use all other methods if you want to. There are many ways to send the authentication information. That's not the essence in this video. In this video we're gonna see how we can programmatically call our function and put a post request to get the token in the Python environment. So let me just quickly develop my function. What I'm going to do, let me just call it, and to get it smoother, I'm just going to copy it from the generic template. So you can see I have called it get access token with secret, and now these are the main parameters that you need to pay a careful attention, because these are the parameters that I'm going to fill from the Postman. And that's why I mentioned that we normally test it in the Postman, and then we move it into the coding environment. So we can fix all the glitches within the Postman. And once we move the values in here, it's going to be smooth. Okay, so let me just get these values from the Cognito, and you can see Cognito I need, because I'm getting the token, so I need that URL. And I'm going to copy this URL completely because I can fix it within the coding environment. You can see it's a pretty big URL. So up to here, you can see we need the Cognito domain URL /auth2/token. So all I need this URL up to this point. So let me just copy that. And at the end, you can see I have embedded auth2/token, right? So that's the first parameter. The URL is going to be this. Generally, in Postman, we provide the parameter after the question mark, and then they are separated by the and sign. But within the Python environment, we need to pass everything separately. So we have different parameters as part of the function that we can fill them with the values, and we can pass it as part of those parameters to the request call. Now, the second thing we need is the client ID, which I do have in here. I can copy it. And if you remember, I told you, be very careful with the and sign. You don't need to copy and sign because the and is more like a separator. Otherwise, it's going to fail the request. And client secret, let me grab the client secret in here. So that's going to be my client secret. So that's going to be my client secret. In last video, I'm going to show you how we can secure these parameters, because obviously these three parameters I don't want to be embedded as part of my code, but currently I'm just, because I'm doing it from the dev perspective, so I'm just putting the values just to making sure the function is correctly working. Because as a next step, once this part is working, I will move these parameter to KMS or secure service, and then call that service to get the values in here. That's a separate thing. We're gonna enhance it in the upcoming video. So don't worry about considering these values to be available as part of the dev. So that's not gonna be case once we finalize this code. Now scope, if you remember, we created a scope, and then we need that scope as part of this exercise as well. So let me copy this scope from the other screen. So content tab, if you remember, I told you we need to provide that hard-coded value. So I think we are good with all this value. And now we set up the parameter. I think now we need to set up the payload. And if I copy the payload part, here with me, I have two screens. I'm copying from the other screen, so you can see now I have after header. We can even, you know what I can do. Let me just do this way. Set up the payload first, because that would be more rational, because that way I have all my values defined. So in payload, obviously we are providing three parameters. One is grant type, and if you remember, we have set it up that our grant type is going to be client credentials. Client ID, we have already seen that has been created as part of the Cognito configuration. And scope is coming from the scope part, which we have configured as well. Now, once we have payload, header, and these parameters set, they are ready to rock. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna define an object on the class that we have imported. So we are going to, like I mentioned, we are going to use the HTTP basic authentication. And if I quickly map it back to the Postman, so let me quickly show you where it has been mapped. So in the post request, if I come in here, authorization, so that's the part where which I'm actually mapping as part of, you know, authentication object. So that part, if you want to code it, you need that particular library, HTTP basic authentication, and you need to pass the client ID and client secret. That's the simplest way. Like I mentioned, we have other method as well, and if you want, you can go and you can use those methods. You can see we have a bunch of methods that we can use it, right? There's no harm to try other method, but what I found is the basic authentication is the simplest one, and it's gonna work for us. So let's see. So now our authentication object has been declared. We have filled up all the values. So the next step, obviously, we're gonna use the request object, and we're gonna call it method post because we are making a post call. We need to put the URL, and if you remember, URL is the Cognito domain URL that we are going to use to generate the JWT token. We need to put the header because header has some information, authentication has its own information, and payload has its own information. And if that request.post method is successful, we're going to get back the token in the response object. So let's see if we are able to print the response information into our screen. And that's the general practice. We generally divide our code into chunks and then we build the code in chunks. And once the chunks are working, then we integrate them back together. So right now, I'm not concerned about API. All I need to make sure that if I'm able to get my token back into the variable. So you can see if the code is successful, we're going to get the return status code is equal to 200. Now, where I get it that I'm going to get the status code is 200 on success. So going back into Postman. Sorry, let me just close these. I don't want this to be now. So let me quickly jump back into Postman. So you can see if my call is successful, you can see in the Postman status is equal to 200. And okay, so that if there is another status, it's going to actually show you the message accordingly, right? So that's where the Postman is very helpful to test our APIs and especially the token to make sure all things are working in Postman, and then we move into dev environment. All right, so we are getting the token and we are extracting that token. It's pretty simple. We are getting the response information in the JSON, and what we're going to do, we're going to actually put that response into an object called data, and from the data, then we can later on get the value of the access token. So it's pretty simple and straightforward. Like if I can show you, the information is coming in the JSON output. So the results are coming JSON output, and we can store this information or result into a variable. And once we have that variable, then we can, by passing the key, we can extract the value. Pretty simple concept. So once we have that data object retaining the token, then we just need to pass the key and it will return us this valid token. We can get the expired in and token type as well. All right. So I think we are pretty good at this stage. Sure. I think I opened the wrong window. Okay, I think that's the one. Yeah, so that's the one where we were working. I think I have swept the window. So we are pretty good. So like I mentioned, we are going to get the information from the token, and like I mentioned, we can save that information into an variable. Let's do that because I think that would be simple. Let me just declare the variable data, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get that in here, and in data, I can, the way we have discussed, right? So it's not going to be different. So we are getting the JSON in data, and once we have access token, we're going to print that token on our screen. All right, so our function is ready. So let me just call this function because it has all the values set. So time to test, let me just hit. There we go. Excellent. So you can see I'm getting a valid token from Cognito, and let me quickly copy it. And what I'll do, I'll put that token into JWT.io. The same exercise, we did it, it didn't copy. Let me just grab that token again. Sometime Control C. Okay. All right. So it's not allowing me. Okay, I can copy that in here. Let me paste it. Sometimes copy pasting is terrible. Hopefully now it will come. Let me quickly go back and let me know. Okay, now it's working. So you can see my token is access token and it is coming from the scope. Issuer is my Cognito URL that I have configured. Expiry is gonna expire in 1 hour and client ID. So it's the same information. So that means I got the legitimate token. Now the next step is to get the API using that legitimate token. So I'm going to enhance the code to build the API call that will use this token to call the API and it will return the result. So hopefully that video makes sense. Feel free to put any comment or question if you have. Otherwise, I believe you like it. And thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the remaining part.